Now that the primary game functions have been built, we're going to spend a bit of time working on the information portion of the screen. There's going to be a bit of text displayed over here, so we're going to build a command that writes the text for us. All of this will happen inside of the display module. The first thing we need to do is pick a font. We're going to use an Arial type font, and this command is an easy way to let the computer get that font for us. Then we're going to define the writing function. When we write the text, the first thing we need is the surface where we're going to do the writing, which is the screen. Then we're going to need the actual text we want displayed, the size of that text, and the location. The code is pretty straightforward. The first line sets the font and size, and the second creates a surface that contains the desired text. From here, the steps follow the same pattern as displaying the sprites. The image is just a surface containing the rendered text. Then we get the rectangle for the image and put it in the right location. And the last step, we blend it to the screen. Even though there's not much going on with this function, it's useful for us to create it. Otherwise, we would have to type in these same 5 lines of code over and over for every new piece of text we want to add to the screen. Our goal is to have a simple information display. It will have some text that describes the game at the top, then a place for the score and the number of remaining lives. You can see that there's a lot of empty space here that you can fill with other types of information, but sometimes it's better to have less. If you put too much information over here, then it becomes visual noise. If you look at the bottom of the play area, you can see that we've also added a health bar. We will have all these pieces in place by the end of the video. Here is the entire code for the information display. The first line was from before, so that we cover up the sprites that fall off the right side of the game area. From here, we can see the value of the function that we created. Each line of text is one line of code. The calculations for the coordinates make it so that our text is centered in the information area. Since these are calculated coordinates, if we change the dimensions of the screen, they would still be correctly centered. You can put whatever information you want in your game, but this text is to memorialize the game as part of our 2022 Game Jam. We also have code here to display the score and the remaining lives, but we haven't actually built this information yet. Once we do, this code will display it. Notice that there are set brackets inside of the text string and a dot format at the end. This is a way of putting the value of variables into a text string in Python. The score, lives, and shields are tied to the player's sprite, and this will make it easier for us to pass information along to other parts of the game. Let's first think through the score. Every time we shoot an asteroid, we want to increase the score. This part of the code appears where we calculate the collisions between the lasers and the asteroids. For this game, we're going to make the value of the asteroid the width of the asteroid's rectangle. Since the rectangle changes depending on the rotation of the asteroid, this creates more variation in the score. This is ultimately an arbitrary system, and you can do whatever you want. At this point, we've got a value for the remaining lives, but we don't have a mechanism for using those lives. Right now, when the player is shot, we run the hide method on the spaceship, and then when the cooldown timer runs out, we exit the game. These steps need to change. When we hide the player, we also need to reduce the number of lives. And at the end of the cooldown timer, we need to apply some logic. If the player still has some lives, then we're going to make them reappear in the game. Otherwise, the game will be over. We've added an unhide method that puts the player back into the game. This sets the player's dead flag back to false, puts the player in the middle of the play area, and resets the shields. Speaking of the shields, that's the last thing we need to do here. Rather than having the player die on a single hit, we're going to give them some shields that slowly weaken when hit. We'll think about the shield as a percentage, so it starts at 100. Then we're going to need a mechanism for the player to take damage. When the asteroid hits the spaceship, instead of immediately making the player blow up, we're going to blow up the asteroid and take away some of the shields. The damage will be half the width of the rectangle. If the shields run out, then we'll run our big explosion. It would be good to add a display for the shields so that the player knows when they're getting close to death. There's a bit of math that goes into this bar, but it's not too bad. We first have to make sure that we don't accidentally draw a negative health bar. And then we want it centered on the game screen towards the bottom, and we want the fill to correspond to the percent of shields that remain. Once that is done, we pick the color of the health bar based on the remaining shields. And these last commands are the ones that actually draw the health bar using rectangles. A lot of code happened quickly in this video. We're at the point of the project where you definitely would benefit from playing around with it to really understand what's happening. Try changing some of the parameters and see what happens. See if you can increase the level of damage done by the asteroids or increase the number of player lives. You can also play around with adding or changing the text that's on the screen. The additional experience will really help with the next video, as you're going to create a screen that appears at startup and at game over.